welcome to Guys, a video series talking about different types of baseball guys. In this episode, we're talking about underrated guys from the 1970s. These are guys who put up great numbers but never got the accolades. Like I've done with the underrated 80s and 90s guys videos, I'm going to start by comparing these guys to an underrated movie. And the 70s are my favorite decade for Hollywood movies. There's just so many classics. But there are plenty of lesser known but still excellent films that did not quite get recognition at the time. For example, Brian De Palma's Carrie was a huge hit and is a classic that has stood the test of time, but I'm also a big fan of De Palma's previous feature, Obsession, which didn't get a ton of critical love at the time despite being an excellent addition to the De Palma does Hitchcock but pervy canon. Like Obsession, these players weren't the best of their generation by any means, but they're definitely worth another look. So, alright, let's obsess a bit about these underrated 70s guys. Once again, I'm using this statistical methodology as a jumping off point for this roster. We're finding the players with the most WAR during the 70s who never landed in the top 10 in MVP or Cy Young voting at any point during their careers, 70s or otherwise. But since this is guys, I retain Vibes veto power, and if something just feels wrong, I'll make a switch. Catcher, Gene Tenace. Talked about Fury Gene Tenace in the On Base Guys episode, but I'll just reiterate here that Gene is a borderline Hall of Famer. The 13th ranking catcher in history by Jaws, he was clearly underrated due to being an elite walk and hit by pitch guy with good power, but low batting averages. His case takes a bit of a hit because he played almost half his games as a first baseman, but he definitely did not get a fair shake by Hall of Fame voters, receiving just one vote in his only year on the ballot. Granted, the ballot was pretty stacked that year, but still. I mean, there were 47 people that felt they had to vote for Roy Face again in his 14th year on the ballot, a 21 WAR player. First base, George Scott. I'm going to go vibes here because Scott did land in the top 10 in MVP voting twice, but I don't think he's that well remembered beyond his playing days. As you can see, he did get MVP votes in a lot of seasons as well as Gold Glove awards, so you could even say he's a bit overrated in his day. But I think his lack of postseason exposure, just one series in '67, leads to him being a bit forgotten to time, outside of Boston, where he is a member of the Red Sox Hall of Fame. But he was a very good player who put up 36.6 WAR in a 14-year career. Second base, Bobby Gritch. Going vibes again, as Gritch did have 2 seasons where he cracked the top 10, but Gritch is a guy who I think ought to be in the Hall of Fame. He's to the 70s what Lou Whitaker and Willie Randolph were to the 80s. Criminally underrated second baseman. He ranks 9th in WAR and 8th in Jaws among second basemen, ahead of Hall of Famers Frankie Frisch, Jackie Robinson, Ryan Sandberg, Roberto Alomar, and Craig Biggio. He was an elite defensive player, which explains why he was underrated, but he was also a terrific hitter, who even led the league in homers, slugging, and OPS plus in the strike-shortened 1981 season. Not to say he should have been MVP that year, probably should have been Ricky or Dewey, but 14th place? Come on. But Bobby's best year was 1973 when he led the league in WAR, but came in 19th with just 9 vote points. Third base, Daryl Evans. Talked about Evans in the underrated 80s guys video, where he was our first baseman. Here, he's our third baseman. Evans' early days with the Braves were tremendous, but he was underrated because the Braves were mostly terrible back then. He toiled in obscurity for them and for some bad late 70s Giants teams. In '73, Evans posted 9 WAR, second only to Joe Morgan for position players, but came in 18th in MVP voting. I would say Evans is also a borderline Hall of Famer who gets dinged because he played forever to compile his 58.7 career WAR and spent a lot of that time at first base and DH. Shortstop, Mark Belanger. Just talked about Belanger in the Smokers episode. He was widely considered one of the best fielders in the league, but his numbers show him as possibly the best defensive shortstop in baseball history. Ozzie Smith is the all-time leader in defensive WAR, but he has a slim lead over Belanger, who put up these numbers in 500 fewer games. Now, I don't know that you can exactly hold that against Ozzie, who was the rare guy that was able to play elite shortstop defense into his late 30s and even early 40s. If Belanger had stayed in the league a few more years, he might have actually lost ground on Ozzie. But he was up there, as these stats appear to show. I never saw Belanger play, but as someone who watched a bunch of Ozzie Smith as a kid, I have a hard time even considering the notion that there was ever anyone better than the Wizard. Belanger's best year was his 6.5 WAR 1976, when he didn't receive a single MVP vote. Which is understandable, as Belanger's bat was never good. In fact, 76 was the only year he ever had a positive year in batting runs. Left field, Roy White. Always weird when a Yankees player is underrated, but White came up with the Bombers in 65, the first year of a rare decade-plus playoff drought in the Bronx. He was a key part of the Yankees' resurgence in the 70s, but was outshone by then by other guys. He was also one of those guys who got undervalued due to the fact that he did everything well, but didn't do any one thing exceptionally. Center field, Willie Davis. Willie Davis had some monster seasons in his career without ever landing higher than 16th in MVP voting. He would also definitely make the underrated 60s guys team, as he put up more value in that decade, including a massive 8.4 WAR year in 1964 that garnered not a single MVP vote. He didn't reach quite those heights in the 70s, but he did put up a voteless 5.7 WAR season in 1972. He was another guy who was underrated due to a lot of his value coming from elite defense as well as terrific base running, but he also had a solid bat. At 60.8 career WAR, he ranks 15th all-time for center fielders. The only non-Hall of Famers in front of him are Mike Trout, who will be in on the first ballot, Carlos Beltran, who looks to be going in next year, Andrew Jones, whose vote tallies have been steadily rising and will likely get in the next couple of years, and Kenny Lofton, who, as we covered in the Underrated 90s Guys episode, really ought to be in. Right field, Bill North, another speed and defense guy. North mainly played center, but we'll shift him to right. North put up a massive 7 WAR season in 1973, fourth among position players, but received just 1% of MVP votes. For DH, I've been using batting runs instead of WAR on these Underrated Guys videos, but this one gave me Bob Watson, who I have a hard time making an underrated argument for. Can't make an overrated argument either, the guy was merely rated. So I'm gonna go vibes here and pick Ron Cey. He did come in 8th in MVP voting in one season, weirdly not one of his better seasons though. Cey is obviously a well-known player and integral part of the Dodgers' great run in the 70s and early 80s. So how is he underrated? Well, I think it's due somewhat to how overrated teammate Steve Garvey was. Both were excellent players, but Cey is pretty clearly the more valuable guy when looking back. Much of this is to do with Cey being a better defender at a more valuable defensive position, but offensively, Cey was also better, or at least as good as Garvey. But Garvey got all the glory because he hit for a better batting average, while the Penguin was elite at walking, or waddling, I guess. In MVP voting from 74 to 81, Garvey garnered more votes than Cey every year, despite only out-warring him in one of those seasons. But the Penguin has been rewarded in the baseball afterlife by doing cool stuff like appearing in cameos as himself on Columbo.
This is Ron Cey.
While Garvey has been doomed to go into politics. It's karma. Rotation. As has been the case with the 80s and 90s versions of these videos, I'm going to go vibes for most of the pitching staff. Going by the formula, the 5 guys I get for the rotation are Jim Barr, Bill Lee, Mike Torres, Marty Patton, and Joe Coleman. I'm going to keep Barr and Lee, but then switch out the other 3. Jim Barr is a guy I had not heard of, but who put up a pretty phenomenal 3-season run for the Giants from 74 to 76. Those 70s Giants teams were mostly terrible, so it's understandable that this guy would fly under the radar. He was 3rd in pitcher WAR in 74 and 76, and was 7th in 75, but didn't receive a single Cy Young vote in any of those seasons. This was likely because he only won between 13 and 15 games in those seasons for the weak-hitting Giants. Bill Lee. Bill Lee is a guy you could actually make an overrated case for because his off-the-field persona was huge while he was generally just a solid mid-rotation starter. But he did have one great season in 73 where his 6.2 WAR definitely could have landed him on this list. Probably would have if he had won 3 more games. Again, I feel like Spaceman could just as easily be an overrated 70s guy. That's just how much of an iconoclast he was. Rick Russell. Had Russell on the underrated 80s guys team, and he's even more deserving of going on this squad. He did have a few years getting Cy Young votes, including a 3rd place finish in 1977, where he probably should have won. He led the league in WAR going away with 9.5, almost twice as much as the winner, Steve Carlton. And he's definitely got a Hall of Fame case, ranking 35th in WAR for pitchers, neck and neck with the likes of John Smoltz and Jim Palmer. Sadly, he fell off the ballot in his first year in 1997. Dave Goltz. Here's another guy I've never heard of. Goltz did come in 6th in the Cy Young in 1977, but followed it up with an even better 6.6 WAR season in 78 that didn't receive any votes. Again, like most of the guys in this rotation, Goltz put up his best years for bad teams. The 1970s Twins in this case. John Matlack. We'll round out the rotation with Matlack, who had maybe the most underrated season of the 1970s. He did get Cy Young votes in one year, 1976, which was not one of his 3 best seasons of the decade. But boy did he get snubbed in 1974, when he led the league with a whopping 9.1 WAR, but was shut out of the awards discussion due to his 13-15 win-loss record for the offensively feeble 1974 Mets. Bullpen. John Hiller. Going vibes for my closer because even though John Hiller got Cy Young votes in 73 and 74 and even came in 4th in MVP voting in 73, he's still underrated in my book. This isn't a guy you really hear about in discussions of the greatest relief pitchers, but he deserves to be there. Look at this dude's year in 1973. 7.9 WAR in 125 relief innings, 1.44 ERA, 2.25 FIP. This is one of the best relief seasons in baseball history. What makes this season even more incredible is that Hiller was just 2 years removed from having a trio of heart attacks in 1971. He underwent ileo bypass surgery to remove 7 feet of his small intestines, the portion that absorbs cholesterol. Doctors told him that he'd never pitch again, but he certainly proved them wrong, coming back mid-season in 72 and then having this monster 73. And he followed it up with 5 more really good seasons. In fact, Hiller ranks 8th in WAR all time among relief pitchers, which possibly undersells or oversells him depending on certain factors. Many of the guys on this list above him spent years as full-time starters or as swingmen. Hiller only started 43 games in his career. Eckersley, Tom Gordon, Bobby Shantz, and Furpo Marbury all started a significant number of games, so Hiller could be thought of as the 4th best reliever in history. But you can also look at R-JAWS, which I admit I really don't fully understand, but it says it averages WAR, win probability added, and win probability added divided by leverage index. This seems kind of bullshitty to me. It's giving a lot of value to context. But by this metric, Hiller falls way down to 24th. I guess this stat is meant to equalize for the value from starts that many of these relievers had. But this also hurts the older school relievers who made lots of 2 and 3 inning appearances, so they didn't maximize their leverage like more modern closers. Anyway, underrated dude. Jim Kern. Gonna go vibes again for Kern, a similar innings-eating reliever for bad teams. Cleveland and Texas this time, who's not really remembered despite having a very solid 1970s run before injuries slowed him down. Kern did get Cy Young votes in 79 for a 6.1 WAR season out of the pen, where he threw a whopping 143 relief innings. Bill Campbell. And one more vibes-based innings-eating reliever with Campbell, who I remember being a kind of meh reliever in the 80s, but I didn't realize how good he was in the 70s. He got Cy Young votes in 76 and 77 because he pulled off the rare feat of getting a bunch of wins out of the pen. The awards voters love when that happens for some reason. Campbell's 17 wins out of the pen is tied for 2nd place all time with John Hiller for pitcher wins with no starts. Roy Face, who we also mentioned earlier, is the big dog with 18. Those 18 wins are probably why he stayed on the MVP ballot for 15 years. As usual, I think it's hard to make the case for relievers being all that underrated. Really, John Hiller is the only guy here who I'd say is truly underrated. But gotta fill out the staff, so I'll take Terry Forster, a very consistent lefty reliever who I somehow left off our lugs roster.
Do you know who Terry Forster is? Left-handed relief pitcher. The fattest man in all of professional sports.
In the 80s, Forster's husky body type would become the source for an ongoing David Letterman bit.
He's a left-hander, ERA about 3.5. What a fat tub of goo!
And Forster would play along with the joke, even releasing the Fat Boys-inspired novelty rap single, Fat Is In.
Chocolate cone, chocolate cone, chocolate cone. We got a brand new time when fat is fine, where being overweight is a real good sign. Eat what you want, don't exercise, cause nothing turns me on like cellulite thighs. Fat is in stuff your face and don't be thin. Double chins are tons of fun. On the beach you block the sun.
Ken Forsch, a swingman who had a very solid 27 WAR career in 16 seasons, splitting time pretty evenly between starting and relieving. And finally, glasses guy Gary Lavelle, another competent lefty. Bench, Buddy Bell and Toby Hera, third base / shortstop. I feel like I've talked about these guys in several videos, including the underrated 80s guy vid. Have to talk about these two guys together because they are bizarro versions of each other. Similar types of players who spent most of their careers on bad Rangers and Indians teams and were traded for each other prior to the 79 season. Bell in the 70s was more of a glove-first player before his bat came alive in the 80s. Hera was a solid hitter through his whole career, but derived a lot of his 70s value by playing shortstop before moving to third in the 80s. Bell and Hera played 18 and 17 years respectively, but neither ever appeared in a single postseason game. Both of these guys fell off the Hall of Fame ballot after their first year of eligibility. I wouldn't say that Hera is a Hall of Famer by any means, but there are certainly lesser players who've hung around on the ballot for quite a while. Not to pile on Steve Garvey, but the dude and his 38 WAR hung around the ballot for 15 years. It's all politics. Buddy Bell, on the other hand, I'd say is a borderline Hall of Famer with his 66.3 WAR, landing him 13th among third basemen, 15th by Jaws. Catcher, Jim Sunberg. Sunberg had a better career than you might remember. I was surprised to find that he ranked 24th all-time in WAR and Jaws among catchers. And Sunberg was a pure catcher who never moved off of the position. If you look at guys who played 95% or more of their games at catcher, Sunberg comes in 8th all-time behind a bunch of legends and Jason Kendall. Chris Spire. I remember this guy from his later years in the 80s as a utility guy, but he was a pretty solid starting shortstop for the Giants and Expos in the 70s. And he had one phenomenal year in 72 where he was tied for 5th in WAR among position players with 6.1 and got just one MVP vote. Davey Lopes, second base. Similar to Ron Say, Lopes is far from a forgotten player as he was a key part of those great Dodgers infields, but he also got Garvey'd a bit. Lopes never had any amazing standout years, he was just a consistent 3.5 to 5.5 WAR guy throughout the 70s. He only received MVP votes in one season. Don Money, third base. Similar to Lopes, Money was never elite, but was consistently good throughout the 70s, but on bad teams.
The Milwaukee Brewers!
Money was the poor man's Brooks Robinson, so much so that he was given the nickname Brooks in 1974 after losing the Gold Glove to Robinson. It's really kind of a depressing nickname, and not really a flattering comparison for Money, at least defensively speaking. And I'll take Rusty Staub, another guy we left off our lugs roster.
You know who else is a fat ball player? And this is going to upset people, but you got to admit this is true. Rusty Staub. He's enormous, ladies and gentlemen.
Rusty did come in 5th in MVP voting in 1978, I guess for reasons having to do with RBIs. Staub was not actually very good that year, recording just 1.5 WAR. His numbers that year take a hit due to him being a DH, but even still, his offensive output on its own is merely in pretty good territory. I mean, a DH with a sub 800 OPS should not be getting a lot of MVP votes. But Le Grand Orange in his Quebecois heyday did deserve some MVP love. He put up 3 consecutive 6+ WAR seasons in 69 to 71, but received votes in only 2, coming in 19th and 36th. All right, that concludes our underrated 70s guys episode. Let us know in the comments who you think we missed on this list.
You got